Close your eyes for just a moment. I want you to imagine something. It's noon in Texas, the summer of 1873. The kind of heat that doesn't just sit on your skin, it presses through it, down into your bones, into your lungs, into every breath you try to take. The sun isn't warm here. It's violent. It hammers down on the cracked dirt streets of a nowhere town called Dusty Creek with the kind of fury that makes men mean and makes horses nervous. The saloon smells like sweat and tobacco and spilled whiskey that nobody bothered to wipe up from 3 nights ago. The ceiling fans don't work. The piano in the corner went silent an hour ago because even the piano player got tired of fighting the heat. A few dozen men sit around tables with cards and glasses, doing what men do in places like this. They wait. For something, for anything, for the day to end, and then the doors open. He doesn't burst through them. He doesn't kick them wide. He simply pushes them open slowly, deliberately, the way a man moves when he has no reason to rush because he knows exactly what he came here to do. The light pours in around him like a frame, and for just a second, nobody in the room can quite make out his face. They see a tall silhouette. They see black clothing. They see the glint of 2 revolvers on his hips. And something else, something in the way he stands, something in the way he moves. Every single man in that room feels it before they understand it. Danger, not the loud, drunken danger of a fight about to start. Something colder, something that has been walking toward this room for a very, very long time. His skin is dark as midnight. His eyes are darker still. He walks to the back of the room without looking left or right, as if every other person in that saloon is furniture. He stops at a table where a heavy-set man sits nursing a whiskey, red-faced and slow-eyed from an early start. The heavy-set man looks up, the room goes quiet, and within 60 seconds, a single gunshot cracks the silence open like a thunderclap, and then the man in black is gone. Just like that, like smoke on the wind, the man slumped over the table was named Thomas Birch, former plantation overseer, known in certain circles for certain things that polite history would rather not discuss. The shooter had no wanted poster yet. No name on record, no face that anyone could quite describe, but he had a list. A list of names he had been carrying for 15 years, written not on paper, but in the deepest, most fireproof corner of his memory. And Thomas Birch was only the first name on it. Welcome back. Before we go any further, if this is your first time on this channel, I need you to hit subscribe right now and drop a comment telling me what city and country you're watching from. It matters. These stories only stay alive when people like you choose to remember them. Now, let's go back, way back, because to understand who that man was, and why he walked into that saloon, and what turned a child into a ghost, we need to start at the beginning. Not his beginning, his mother's. You see, there's a thing that happens when you study the history of American slavery long enough. You stop seeing numbers. You start seeing faces. The year is 1847. The place is a cotton plantation called the Whitmore Estate, sprawled across 3,000 acres of flat, brutal Texas land, about 40 miles west of Houston. Colonel Henry Whitmore owns all of it, the land, the cotton, the buildings, the animals, and, according to the law of the United States at the time, 112 human beings. Now, I want to pause on that number for just a second. 112, that's not an abstraction. That's 112 people who woke up every morning knowing that their body, their labor, their children, and their future belonged to someone else by law. Someone who could sell them the way you sell furniture. Someone who could punish them the way you punish a misbehaving animal. Someone who, if they died from that punishment, would face absolutely no legal consequences whatsoever. Colonel Henry Whitmore was not, by the standards of his time, considered a monster. That's the part that should keep you up at night. He was considered a gentleman, a successful businessman, an upstanding citizen. His name appeared in newspapers as an example of Southern prosperity. He was invited to dinner parties. He went to church. He had a wife and children who loved him. And every single day, he presided over a system of organized, legalized cruelty that would make your stomach turn. But this story isn't really about him, not yet. This story starts with a woman named Abigail. Abigail worked inside the main house, cooking meals, cleaning floors, carrying the invisible weight of a life she hadn't chosen and couldn't escape. Among the enslaved people on the Whitmore plantation, she was known for two things, her kindness and her voice. She sang while she worked. Old spirituals, the kind her own grandmother had taught her, songs about Moses and rivers, and a promised land that always seemed to exist just on the other side of somewhere impossibly far away. The other enslaved people said Abigail's voice could make you cry, even when you didn't understand the words. It carried something in it that words alone can't hold. Hope, maybe, or the memory of hope, or the stubborn refusal to let hope die even when everything around you was designed to kill it. In the darkness of the slave cabin where she lived alongside 6 other families, Abigail whispered a name into her newborn son's ear. Zechariah. She had chosen it from the Bible. In Hebrew, it means God remembers, and every single night, without fail, she pressed her lips close to his small face and said the same words. Your name means God remembers. He remembers every hurt, every tear, every wrong done to his children. And one day, baby, he will make it right. You remember that, no matter what they do to you. God remembers. Think about that for a moment. This woman, living in one of the most brutal conditions that human beings have ever devised, chose to name her child God remembers. She wasn't naive. She knew exactly what kind of world her son had been born into. She had no illusions about it. She had seen too much. But she refused, absolutely refused, to let her child come into this world without a name that carried a promise. The promise that none of this would be forgotten, that somewhere, somehow, there was an accounting coming. She just didn't know it would come through him. Zechariah's father was sold when the boy was 3 years old. Sold to a plantation in Louisiana because Colonel Whitmore needed money to buy more land. That's how it worked. You needed capital, you liquidated assets. Fathers were assets, so fathers became fields. Zechariah had no memory of the man, only the stories his mother told. Strong, proud, gone. By the age of 5, Zechariah was already working. Not in the fields, he was too small for that, but there was never a shortage of labor for a small child on a plantation. Carrying water to the field hands in the scorching mid-day heat, gathering eggs, sweeping paths, running errands for the White family. The Whitmore children, 2 boys and a girl about his age, sometimes threw rocks at him for entertainment. It was a game to them, a way to pass the time. If Zechariah cried, he was whipped. If he ran, he was whipped harder. He learned very quickly not to cry. He learned to make his face a mask, blank, still, showing nothing. And behind that mask, something began to take shape, something quiet and watchful and patient in the way that only a child who has had to grow up too fast can be patient. The head overseer on the Whitmore plantation was a man named Thomas Birch. Remember that name? We'll come back to it. Birch was not a wealthy man. He came from what the plantation owners called, behind their backs, white trash, poor, uneducated, with nothing to recommend him except one particular skill. He was very, very good at hurting people, and he had discovered, somewhere along the way, that he enjoyed it. Colonel Whitmore paid him well to maintain discipline. Birch earned every penny. He carried a whip made of braided leather with small metal weights woven into the tips. When it struck flesh, it didn't just bruise, it tore. It left marks that became scars, that became a permanent map of someone else's cruelty written on your skin forever. Birch used that whip almost every day. He said it was necessary to maintain order, but anyone who watched him work could see the truth in his eyes. The slight smile, the almost imperceptible straightening of the shoulders before the swing. He wasn't maintaining order. He was indulging himself. Zechariah was 7 years old on the day his mother died. It was a Tuesday. August, the heat was over 100 degrees, the kind of heat where the air itself seems to shimmer, where every breath feels like swallowing something that doesn't want to be swallowed. Abigail was carrying a large ceramic jug of milk from the kitchen to the dining room. Her hands were slick with sweat. The jug was heavy. It slipped, it fell, it shattered on the hardwood floor, spreading milk across polished wood. Mrs. Whitmore was in the room when it happened. She screamed, not because she was hurt. The jug hadn't come anywhere near her. She screamed because a slave had broken something that belonged to her. Because she was hot and irritable and needed someone to punish. And here, right in front of her, was someone she had every legal right to punish however she saw fit. She called for Thomas Birch. Now, I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. In 1858, Texas, what was about to happen wasn't considered a crime. It wasn't considered unusual. It wasn't even considered noteworthy enough to write down. This was just Tuesday. This was the system functioning exactly as it was designed to function. Normal Tuesday afternoon on a prosperous southern plantation. Zechariah was outside sweeping the front path when he heard his mother scream. He ran. He wasn't supposed to run. Slaves weren't supposed to run anywhere near the main house, but he heard his mother's voice, and his legs moved before his brain could stop them. He came around the corner of the house and saw Thomas Birch had his mother tied to a wooden post. Her dress had been torn from her back. Birch was standing behind her with the whip. Mrs. Whitmore was watching from the shade of a pecan tree, fanning herself. Colonel Whitmore stood beside his wife, arms crossed, looking almost bored. This was routine for them. This was nothing special. Zechariah tried to run to his mother. An overseer caught him and held him in place. "Watch, boy," the man said. "Watch what happens when you people forget your place." And so Zechariah watched. He had no choice. He counted every stroke, 37. He watched his mother's screams turn to moaning, then to silence. He watched her body go limp against the post. He watched Thomas Birch stop, breathe hard from the exertion, and wipe the sweat from his forehead the way a man wipes sweat after doing ordinary work. He watched Colonel Whitmore nod, just a small, satisfied nod, and walk back toward the house with his wife as if nothing important had just happened. They left Abigail tied to the post. The other enslaved people weren't allowed to help her until nightfall. By then, it was too late. The wounds had already begun to fester in the August heat. She developed a fever. By dawn, she was dead. Zechariah was not allowed to attend her burial. He was not allowed to say goodbye. He was sent to the fields the very same morning. Colonel Whitmore had decided that 7 was old enough to start picking cotton. Grief was not a luxury available to property, but something had happened inside that 7-year-old boy. Something had broken, or perhaps something had been born. He went to the fields. He came back to the cabin that night. He lay in the spot where his mother used to sleep, and he made a promise not to God, not to anyone who might be listening, but to himself. He would find Thomas Birch. He would find Colonel Whitmore. He would find everyone who had stood there watching while his mother died. And he would make every single one of them pay. He was 7 years old, and now this is where it gets even harder to hear. 2 years pass, 2 years of cotton fields and whip scars and the slow, grinding weight of a life designed to crush a person's spirit. Zechariah was whipped at least once a week, sometimes more. The overseers noticed something about him that made them uneasy. Most children, after enough beatings, developed a certain look in their eyes, a dullness, a defeat. The system called it breaking. It was the whole point of the violence, not just to punish, but to destroy the will to resist. Zechariah never got that look. His eyes stayed sharp, focused, alert. When overseers looked into those eyes, they saw something that disturbed them. A cold patience, a rage that had learned to become still. Thomas Birch noticed it once and commented to another overseer, "That one's got the devil in him. We're going to have to sell him before he's grown. He's the type that kills masters in their sleep." He wasn't wrong, but he was too late. In 1859, when Zechariah was 9 years old, Colonel Whitmore sold his younger sister. Her name was Grace. She was 6 years old. Since their mother's death, Zechariah had been the one making sure she ate, making sure the older children didn't hurt her, telling her stories at night, the same stories their mother used to tell about Moses and freedom, and a land where nobody was ever sold. Grace was the only family he had left, the only person in the world he still loved. A slave trader named William Crawford came to the plantation one morning in a fine carriage. He walked through the slave quarters with Colonel Whitmore, examining human merchandise the way you examine livestock at a market. He checked teeth, he squeezed muscles, he asked about temperament. When he saw Grace, he stopped. "That one," he said. "How much for the girl?" Zechariah watched from 20 feet away. He couldn't move, he couldn't speak. Enslaved people had no legal right to object when their family was sold. He stood there, paralyzed, while Colonel Whitmore and William Crawford negotiated the price of his 6-year-old sister over the course of a pleasant afternoon conversation. They settled on $400. Grace was put in a wagon that same day. She screamed for Zechariah as they loaded her in. She reached out her small hands toward him. Zach, don't let them take me." He ran toward the wagon. An overseer hit him in the head with the butt of a rifle. When he opened his eyes, Grace was gone. He never saw her again. He never found out what happened to her. But he added 2 more names to the list he was carrying inside himself. Colonel Whitmore, William Crawford. Now, you might be wondering what keeps a child going in conditions like this. What makes you get up the next morning and put one foot in front of the other when everything you love keeps being taken? For Zechariah, the answer was a boy named Samuel. Samuel was about Zechariah's age, maybe a year older. Quick to smile, talkative, full of a kind of warmth that somehow survived everything the system tried to do to it. Where Zechariah was silent and watchful and burning cold with contained hate, Samuel moved through the world with something almost like lightness. They were complete opposites, and they were each other's only real lifeline. They made plans together, whispered plans in the darkness of the cabin at night. After the overseers had made their last rounds, they would escape, go north, find Grace, build a new life somewhere that had never heard of Colonel Whitmore or Thomas Birch or the Whitmore estate. They both knew these plans were probably impossible, but having them, speaking them out loud, that made the days survivable. It made tomorrow feel like a destination rather than just another version of today. In December of 1860, Samuel was caught stealing food. A single piece of bread from the kitchen. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. He had given his portion to a sick child. He was hungry and he was kind, and those 2 things together got him killed. Colonel Whitmore gathered all the enslaved people in front of the main house. He spoke in his calm, reasonable voice, the one he used when he wanted to demonstrate that he was a fair man, a principled man, a man of God. "Stealing is a crime," he said, "a crime against me, against this plantation, against the natural order that God himself established." They hanged Samuel from a pecan tree. Thomas Birch put the rope around his neck. The drop wasn't long enough to break it. Samuel strangled slowly. His feet kicked. His hands clutched at the rope. It took almost 5 minutes, and Zechariah was forced to watch every single second of it. When it was over, Colonel Whitmore ordered the body left hanging for 3 days. A warning, a reminder, a demonstration of what this place was. For 3 days, Zechariah walked past Samuel's body on his way to and from the fields. He saw the birds come. He saw what death looks like when it's left in the open air to make a point. On the 3rd night, he made his decision. He waited until the moon went behind the clouds. He crept out of the cabin while everyone else slept. He found a knife in the blacksmith shed and cut Samuel down from the tree. The body was stiff and beginning to smell, and he did not care. He carried his friend over his shoulder to a spot behind the slave quarters where the earth was soft. He dug a grave with his bare hands. It took 3 hours. He placed Samuel inside and covered him with dirt. He did not say a prayer. He did not believe in God anymore. Not after his mother, not after Grace, not after this. But he made a promise. He promised Samuel that his death would mean something. He promised that he would escape. He would survive. He would come back. Then Zechariah ran. No plan, no supplies. Nothing but the clothes on his back and a list of names in his head and 13 years of accumulated rage that had been compressed into something very small and very hard and very, very cold. He was 13 years old. He had never been off the plantation in his entire life. He crawled under the fence at the western edge of the property and started walking west. He didn't know where west led. He just knew it led away. The first 3 days nearly killed him. No food. Water from a creek that may or may not have been clean. Berries that he hoped weren't poisonous. He moved at night and hid during the day, navigating by stars that Samuel had once described to him during those late-night escape plans. Plans that had seemed like fantasy and turned out to be the most useful education either of them ever received. On the 4th day, he heard the dogs. Colonel Whitmore had hired slave catchers, professional hunters, men who did this for a living, men who were very good at it. They had trained hounds and horses and guns and a decades-long track record of never losing a runaway. Zechariah heard the baying coming from the east and understood immediately what it meant. He ran. He ran until his lungs felt like they were tearing open, until his legs gave out completely, until he fell in a dry creek bed and simply could not get up. The dogs were getting closer, the shouts of the men, the thunder of horses, and then he saw the hole. A gap in the creek bank, partially hidden by roots and dead leaves, just barely big enough for a boy to squeeze into. Zechariah didn't hesitate for even half a second. He pushed himself through the opening, wiggling into a small underground space barely big enough to sit up. Dark, smelling of earth and rot, something skittered over his foot in the darkness. He did not move. He did not breathe. The dogs reached the creek bed moments later. He could hear them circling, howling. Confused, the water had washed away his scent, and the hole was downwind. The slave catchers cursed and shouted. They moved on, and Zechariah stayed in that hole for 6 more hours. In the dark, alone, with whatever was moving in there with him. When he finally crawled out, the sun was setting. He was alive. He was free, and he was the most alone he had ever been in his life. What followed was 3 years, 3 years of survival in the wilderness of West Texas that would have broken most grown men before the first winter was out. This was not the settled Texas of plantation country. This was the frontier. Vast stretches of desert scrubland where the Comanches still rode and outlaws hid from the law, and the land itself seemed to operate on a single, uncompromising principle: adapt or die. Zachariah adapted. He taught himself which plants were edible by trial and error, meaning some of the errors nearly killed him. He learned to find water by watching where animals went in the hours before dawn. He built traps from sticks and vine. He stole what he couldn't make. He learned to read tracks, to sense predators, to move through a landscape without leaving a trace of himself behind. The wilderness was brutal, but it was honest. It did not hate him for being black. It did not think of him as property. It simply presented the same terms to everyone: survive or don't. There were no masters here, no overseers, no whips, just the land and the sky and the hard, clarifying work of staying alive. He encountered other people occasionally: outlaws hiding from law, Comanche hunting parties, Mexican traders moving goods across the border. Some tried to hurt him. Some tried to help. He learned to read a human face the same way he read tracks, to know within seconds whether someone meant harm. He became hard, watchful, dangerous. The soft parts of him, the parts that had once known how to trust and hope and love, retreated to somewhere very deep where nothing could reach them. By the time he was 15, Zachariah Creed had killed 2 men in self-defense. Both were men who found a black boy alone in the wilderness and decided that easy money was easy money. Both had underestimated him. They always underestimated him. The first killing was the hardest. He felt something he couldn't quite name afterward, not guilt exactly, but a kind of heaviness. A recognition that a threshold had been crossed and couldn't be uncrossed. By the second, the heaviness was smaller. By the third, it was barely there at all. He noticed this, filed it away. In the spring of 1863, half dead from fever and starvation, Zachariah stumbled into the camp of a man who would change everything. The man was sitting beside a small fire in a deep canyon, roasting a rabbit on a stick. He was old, gray-haired, weathered, his face a map of scars and sun and decades of choices that couldn't be undone. 2 revolvers on his belt, a rifle across his knees. The kind of stillness around him that you only find in people who have learned the very hard way to waste nothing, not movement, not words, not attention. Zachariah collapsed at the edge of the firelight. He was too weak to run, too weak to fight. If this man wanted to kill him, there was nothing he could do about it. The old man looked at this skeleton wrapped in dark skin, this wild creature with burning eyes, and did not reach for his weapons. He watched for a long moment, then he spoke. "You look like death, boy. You planning to die in my camp?" Zachariah found the strength to answer. "Not planning to die anywhere, not yet." The old man smiled, not warm, but recognizing, the smile of someone who sees something familiar. He tossed a piece of rabbit toward the boy. "Good," he said. "Dying is easy, living is the hard part. Eat. You're too skinny to be worth killing. Maybe when you fatten up, I'll change my mind." His name was Joaquin Esperanza, and according to the authorities of 3 Mexican states and 2 American territories, he had been dead for over a decade. You see, Joaquin had been something like a legend in his youth. He had ridden with irregulars and bandits along the border during the Mexican-American War. After the war ended in 1848, and Mexico lost half its territory, land that had belonged to Mexican families for generations, Joaquin kept fighting. Not for any government, not for any flag, for revenge. He robbed stagecoaches carrying California gold. He ambushed army patrols. He became a ghost story, that American mothers used to keep their children from wandering too far. He became a name that made lawmen nervous and politicians angry. And then, because revenge is exhausting and violence has a way of hollowing you out even when you're right, he had simply disappeared, staged his own death one final time, and retreated to these mountains to grow vegetables and try to forget what he had been. He had been here, in this canyon, alone, for almost 10 years. Then Zachariah appeared at the edge of his fire. "You have the eyes," Joaquin said one evening, about a week after the boy had arrived, and the fever had finally broken. "What eyes?" "The eyes of a man who has already decided to kill. I have seen these eyes before, in my own mirror many years ago." He poked at the fire. Sparks rose into the dark. "Who do you want to kill, and why?" Zachariah was quiet for a long time. He hadn't spoken about any of this to anyone, ever. He'd barely spoken at all during his years in the wilderness. But something about Joaquin, the recognition in his eyes, the absence of judgment, the simple fact that for the first time in years someone had shown him kindness without wanting anything back. Something cracked open just slightly, and Zachariah let the story pour out. All of it, his mother, Grace. Samuel, every name, every face, every scar. When he finished, the fire crackled between them. An owl called somewhere in the darkness. Joaquin was quiet for a long moment. "You want revenge," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "I understand this. I have wanted revenge for most of my life, but wanting is not enough. Wanting will only get you killed. You are angry, you are determined, but you are also untrained, unskilled. You would not last 5 minutes against the men you want to kill. They have guns, they have money, they have the law. You have nothing but hate. Then teach me," Zachariah said. "Teach me to be more than I am." Joaquin shook his head. "I came here to escape violence, to find peace, to die quietly in these mountains and let my sins be forgotten." "Then why did you save me? Why didn't you let me die?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. When Joaquin looked up, his eyes were wet. "Because I saw myself in you," he said quietly. "Because I know what it is to have everything taken. Because I was once a boy with nothing but hate, and someone helped me when they didn't have to. I suppose I am repaying a debt I have owed 40 years. He stood slowly, his joints cracking with age. "I will teach you, but understand what you're asking. Once you walk this path, there is no coming back. The things I teach you will change you forever. You will become a killer, and killers do not have the luxury of peace, not in this life, maybe not in the next." Zachariah didn't hesitate for even a moment. "I stopped hoping for peace the day my mother died. All I want now is justice." Joaquin nodded slowly. "Then we begin tomorrow." The training lasted 4 years. 4 years of the most brutal, relentless education imaginable, and I don't just mean combat. Joaquin was not a gentle teacher. He believed that lessons learned through real suffering were lessons never forgotten. He pushed Zachariah to the absolute edge of his limits, and then pushed further. The first year was the body. Hand fighting techniques drawn from a dozen different traditions, street fighting from the slums of Mexico City, knife work from the vaqueros, wrestling holds learned from Comanche warriors, pressure points that could paralyze or kill with a single precise strike. Every day they sparred until Zachariah could barely stand. Every night he nursed his bruises and prepared to do it again tomorrow. The second year was firearms. Joaquin was a master with both rifle and revolver, and he passed every detail of that mastery to his student. Zachariah learned to shoot at still targets, then moving targets, then while moving himself, then while being shot at. He learned to draw and fire in a single fluid motion, so fast, so smooth, that the eye couldn't fully follow it. He learned to reload in total darkness. He learned to maintain his weapons in any condition, in dust, in rain, in cold so deep your fingers stopped working right. By the end of the second year, Zachariah could put 6 bullets through a playing card at 20 paces in under 3 seconds. Joaquin told him he was adequate. The third year was the mind, and this Zachariah had not expected. Joaquin insisted that violence without intelligence was just noise. They played chess for hours every evening, Joaquin teaching Zachariah to think not 1 move ahead, not 2, but 5 or 6. They studied historical battles and ambushes. They discussed strategy and psychology. They practiced sitting still for hours at a time, perfectly silent, until Zachariah could quiet the storm inside his head and find not peace, but something like it, a stillness at the center of all the motion. And then Joaquin taught him the most important lesson of all. Revenge is not a fire, he said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the canyon walls in shades of orange and red and deep, burning gold. Fire burns hot and fast and destroys itself. Revenge is a coal. You keep it alive inside you, small, controlled. You feed it just enough to keep it glowing. You wait, you watch, you prepare. And when the moment is right, when everything is in place, then you blow on that coal and let it become an inferno. Not before, never before. Zachariah took this lesson to heart in a way that surprised even himself. He had been burning with impatience for years. The training transformed that urgency into pure, focused intention. Every skill mastered was a step closer. Every day of patience was a day his enemies were still alive, still going about their lives, still believing they had gotten away with everything they had done. They were wrong. The fourth year was about putting it all together, elaborate scenarios in the mountains, old contacts of Joaquin's brought in to play the role of guards, targets, unexpected complications. Zachariah learned to scout before striking, to identify every possible exit, to anticipate the thing that could go wrong and have a plan for it, to improvise when plans fell apart anyway. By the end of the fourth year, he was no longer a student. He was something else entirely. On the day Zachariah turned 20, Joaquin called him to the fire for a final conversation. The old man had aged visibly during their years together. His hair had gone completely white. His hands trembled slightly now. Time was running its own quiet accounting on him. "You are ready," Joaquin said, "as ready as I can make you. What you do now is your choice, but I want you to understand something before you go." He paused, looking into the fire. "Killing changes you. Every life you take carves something out of your soul. You don't notice at first. You feel powerful, righteous, but over time you realize that parts of you are missing. Parts that could feel joy, the parts that could love, the parts that could imagine a future beyond the next name on your list." He looked at Zachariah with eyes that held decades of things he wished had gone differently. "I am not telling you not to go. The men who hurt you deserve to answer for what they did. I believe this, but I want you to know the cost. When you are finished, if you survive, you will not be the same person who started. You may not like who you become, and there is no road back." Zachariah thought about his mother's face. He thought about Grace's small hands reaching for him. He thought about Samuel. He thought about every scar on his back, every scar that was already there before he ever hurt anyone. "They already took everything from me," he said quietly. "Whatever is left, I'm willing to spend. Whatever I become, I'm willing to live with. They made me this way. They can die by what they created." Joaquin nodded. He reached into his coat and produced 2 revolvers, Colt 1008, 151 Navy models, beautifully maintained, with ivory grips yellowed with age. His own guns, the ones he had carried for 30 years. "These were mine when I was young. They have killed more men than I care to count. Now they are yours." He held them out with something like ceremony. Use them well, and when you are finished, if you find that you want to live, come back to these mountains. I will probably be dead by then, but the cabin will still be here. The garden will still be here, a place to rest if you ever want to stop running." Zachariah took the guns. They settled into his hands as if they had been waiting for him. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." Joaquin smiled his thin, sad smile. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you've survived." 3 days later, Zachariah Creed rode out of the mountains. He wore black from head to toe. He carried 2 ivory-handled revolvers and a rifle and a list of names he had been carrying inside himself for 15 years. The first name was Thomas Birch. It took 2 months to find him. After emancipation and the collapse of the plantation system, Birch had drifted west, ended up in Dusty Creek working as a ranch hand, drinking away his wages and telling anyone who would listen about the good old days. He was heavier than Zachariah remembered. His face was red and bloated, but those hands were the same. Zachariah would have recognized those hands anywhere. He watched Birch for a week before moving, observed every routine. When he woke, where he ate, which saloon he drank at, whether his draw was fast. It wasn't. On the 7th day, Zachariah walked into the saloon at noon. The room went quiet the moment he entered. A black man walking into a white saloon was unusual enough. A black man dressed in black with 2 gleaming pistols, and the bearing of someone who expected the room to notice that was something else entirely. He walked to the back table without looking at anyone and stopped. Thomas Birch squinted up at the stranger, too drunk to register what his instincts were probably trying to tell him. "Thomas Birch," Zachariah said, "not a question who wants to know." Birch slurred. "You worked as an overseer on the Whitmore plantation before the war." Something flickered in Birch's eyes. A memory, a ghost he'd spent years trying to drink away. August 18th, 158, Zachariah said, his voice perfectly calm. "You whipped a woman named Abigail 37 times. She died that night from her wounds." Birch's hand moved toward his pistol. And then he was looking down the barrel of Zachariah's Colt, already drawn, already aimed, already decided. "I wouldn't," Zachariah said quietly. The other men at the table scrambled away. The saloon had gone absolutely still. "Who are you?" Birch whispered. Zachariah leaned in close. "Abigail was my mother. My name is Zachariah. It means God remembers." A beat. "I told you once that I would find you. Did you think I forgot? Did you think God forgot?" Birch started to beg. He was sorry. He was just following orders. He was different now. He had changed. "Please, please, please." Zachariah listened until the words ran out. Then he shook his head. "My mother begged." He said, "You didn't stop." The gunshot echoed through the room like a thunderclap. Birch slumped forward. Zachariah holstered his weapon, turned, and walked out into the blinding afternoon sun. By the time anyone thought to follow, he was gone. The news spread across Texas like fire in dry grass. A black man had walked into a white saloon in broad daylight and executed a white man, had disappeared without a trace. Wanted posters went up within a week, $500 for information leading to the capture of the man they were calling the Black Ghost. But nobody had gotten a clear enough look. Nobody knew his name. He was just a shadow that killed and vanished. Zachariah didn't care about the posters. He was already moving to the next name. William Crawford, the slave trader who had bought Grace, had reinvented himself as a respectable Houston businessman. Cotton, cattle, church every Sunday. Nobody in polite society talked about how he had built his original fortune. Nobody wanted to remember. Crawford kept armed guards. He traveled with protection. He was a careful man. But he had one vulnerability. Every Tuesday evening, he visited a private club on the edge of town, alone without his guards. A creature of habit in a world where habits could get you killed. On a Tuesday in October of 1873, Zachariah entered the club through a back window while the staff was occupied. He moved through the shadows like his name, like a ghost, and found Crawford alone in a private room, bourbon in hand, waiting for his associates. Crawford looked up, his eyes widened. He wasn't stupid. He had heard about Dusty Creek. "You're him," Crawford breathed. "The one they're looking for." Zachariah closed the door. "William Crawford, in 1859, you came to the Whitmore plantation and purchased a 6-year-old girl named Grace. You paid $400 for her. Where is she?" Crawford's hand moved toward the bell on the table. Zachariah drew and fired, a single bullet that shattered the man's wrist. Crawford screamed. That was a warning. "Where is she?" And here is the moment that stopped Zachariah cold. The moment that carved out something in him that never quite grew back. Crawford, sobbing, genuinely had no answer. He didn't remember. He had bought and sold hundreds of enslaved people. Grace was nothing to him, just a number in a ledger he no longer kept. She could be anywhere, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. She could be dead. He simply did not know. Zachariah studied the man's face and understood that he was telling the truth. That Grace, 6 years old, reaching her small hands out, calling his name, had been so utterly insignificant to this man that she had vanished from his memory before his carriage left. Plantation grounds. She was gone, lost somewhere in the vast machinery of slavery. He would probably never know what happened to her. "You don't even remember," Zachariah said softly, not with rage, with something quieter and more devastating. "She was 6 years old. She screamed for me when you took her." Crawford started offering things: money, help searching, anything. "Everything?" Zachariah raised his pistol. "When you get to hell," he said, "tell them Zachariah sent you. Tell them God remembers." Over the next 18 months, Zachariah worked his way through the list, name by name, man by man: a former sheriff, a doctor who had branded runaways, overseers, men who had participated in a system of documented, calculated cruelty and walked away from its end without facing a single legal consequence. The pattern was always the same: a single bullet, a brief message, a ghost that could not be caught. His legend grew with each killing. Some said he was a demon. Some said he was a dead man walking. Some said he didn't exist at all, that the killings were the work of many men who had adopted a single name. In the black communities of Texas, though, passed in whispers from church to church, from family to family, the truth was simpler. He was a man who had decided that if the law would not provide justice, he would provide it himself. He became something beyond personal vengeance, a promise, an acknowledgement that the crimes of slavery were not forgotten, that somewhere someone was keeping count. By the summer of 1875, one name remained: Colonel Henry Whitmore. Whitmore had not prospered in the years since the war. Emancipation had destroyed his fortune. The plantation had fallen into disrepair. The fields had gone unworked. By 1875, he was a shell of his former self in a crumbling mansion, keeping 20 hired gunfighters on his property and drinking whiskey with hands that trembled. He knew Zachariah was coming. He had heard about the others. He had turned his decaying estate into a fortress. "Let him come," Whitmore told his men, glass trembling in his aged hand. "Let that animal come. I'll show him what happens when property forgets its place." On the night of September 15th, 1875, Zachariah came. He moved through the overgrown cotton fields in darkness, the moon hidden behind clouds. He could see the lights of the mansion, the silhouettes of guards at windows and doors, 20 armed men. All waiting. He smiled. He had faced worse odds. He picked off the outer guards one by one, a shot from the dark. A body falling, silence, then another, then another. The remaining guards retreated inside, firing blindly into the darkness, wasting ammunition on shadows. Within 10 minutes, 8 were dead. Zechariah circled the house like a wolf, patient and methodical. He shot out lanterns. He set fire to an outbuilding. He picked off anyone foolish enough to silhouette themselves in a window. By midnight, 4 gunfighters remained, huddled in the main parlor with Whitmore. The old colonel was shaking. The whiskey had worn off. The reality of his situation had arrived in full. Zechariah's voice came from somewhere in the darkness outside. "Send out Whitmore. The rest of you can leave. This is between me and him." The 4 gunfighters looked at each other, looked at the colonel, made their calculation quickly. One of them grabbed Whitmore and dragged him toward the door. "No," Whitmore screamed. "I paid you. You can't. You didn't pay us enough for this." They threw open the front door and shoved the old man out into the night. Then they ran. Whitmore lay in the dirt of his own front yard, his fine clothes stained, his white hair wild, his hands clawing at the ground. He looked nothing like the powerful man who had once owned 112 human beings. He looked like what he had always been, beneath all of it, a coward who had mistaken cruelty for power. Zechariah emerged from the shadows. He walked slowly. He had waited 17 years for this moment, and he was not going to rush it. He stopped a few feet from the old man. Whitmore looked up, eyes red with tears. "Please," he whispered. "Please don't kill me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything." Zechariah stood over him for a long moment. He thought about his mother, her voice, the way she sang in the morning, the name she had chosen for him in the darkness of a slave cabin, the promise she had made him understand before he was old enough to understand anything. He thought about Grace's small hands. He thought about Samuel, and then Zechariah did something he had not planned, something that surprised even himself. He holstered his gun. "I'm not going to kill you," he said. Whitmore looked up, confused, a flicker of desperate hope. "You're not? Then you'll let me go." "No." Zechariah's voice was completely calm. "You're going to live, Whitmore, right here, in this ruin you used to call home. You're going to watch everything you built crumble to dust. You're going to wake up every morning knowing you lost it. Everything, your slaves, your money, your power, your pride, all of it gone. And you're going to spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering if I'll change my mind, wondering if today is the day I come back to finish what I started." He leaned down close, his voice dropping to almost nothing. "Death is too easy for you. You don't get to escape that quickly. You get to live, and every single day you live, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember that a slave stood over you while you crawled in the dirt. You'll remember that your property beat you. And when you finally die, old and alone and forgotten, the last thing you'll see is my mother's face." He straightened up. "Because God remembers, and now so will you." Zechariah turned and walked away into the darkness. The mansion burned through the night, lighting up the Texas sky for miles in every direction. Whitmore was found the next morning, wandering the ruins, muttering to himself. He spent his remaining years in a sanatorium, tormented by nightmares. The doctors said his mind had broken completely. He died alone in 1883, calling out for mercy to someone only he could see. As for Zechariah Creed, he disappeared, the killings stopped, the ghost vanished. Bounty hunters searched for years. Found nothing. In the black communities of Texas, a different story was passed down in whispers and church conversations, and the quiet spaces between one generation and the next. They said he returned to the mountains, found the cabin still standing, found Joaquin Esperanza already buried in a grave overlooking the canyon, they had shared for 4 years. They said Zechariah buried him properly, said whatever words needed to be said, and then hung up his guns. Some said he spent the rest of his life helping others escape, a quiet protector, a shadow that appeared when trouble came and vanished when it was over. Some said he lived to be very old, a still, sad-eyed man who never spoke about his past, but moved with the unmistakable grace of someone who had been trained once to kill. Whether any of it is true, no one knows for certain. The records are incomplete. The witnesses are long gone. All we have is the legend. Now, here's what I need you to sit with before you close this video. Zechariah's story is fiction. The specific man, the specific names, fictional, but the world he inhabited, real, the violence he survived, real, the systems he fought against, as documented and historical as anything you will ever find in a textbook. The overseers like Thomas Birch, real, the slave traders like William Crawford, who bought and sold 6-year-old children and forgot their names before they were out the front gate, real. The masters who presided over it all and were called gentlemen, real. When slavery ended in 1865, the vast majority of these men faced no consequences whatsoever. They kept their land. In many cases, they kept their social standing. They adapted to new forms of extraction and continued as before. The 13th Amendment ended legal chattel slavery. It did not end the culture, the psychology, the economic structures, or the intergenerational wounds it had created. Zechariah's mother chose a name that meant God remembers. She did not live to see justice. Neither did Zechariah, not really, not in any form large enough to balance what had been taken. The men he killed were a handful in a system of millions. The system itself outlasted him. But here is the thing about stories. Here is why they survive. Zechariah chose, at the end, not to kill Whitmore. He had every reason, every justification. He had waited 17 years. He had sacrificed everything, and he chose something else. Not forgiveness, let's be clear about that. He chose something harder and more precise than forgiveness. He chose to make Whitmore live with what he had done. He chose to ensure that the man who had believed he could do anything he wanted to human beings without consequence would spend his remaining years understanding in his bones that he was wrong. Whether that's justice, I'll leave you to decide. What I want you to take away is this. The story of Zechariah Creed asks a question that doesn't have an easy answer. It asks whether we, not us individually, but us as a society, as an inheritor of this history, whether we are willing to remember, whether we are willing to look at what was done and call it what it was, whether we are willing to acknowledge the debts that were never paid and the wounds that were never healed. Every time a story like this is told, a small debt is paid. Every time someone watches or reads or listens and chooses to understand rather than look away, something is honored. Something is kept alive that deserves to be kept alive. His mother whispered it to him in the dark. Every single night, without fail, God remembers every hurt, every tear, every wrong done to his children, and one day he will make it right. She believed it. She lived it, she died for it without ever choosing to. Zechariah carried it across wilderness and mountains and blood and years. He carried that name, that promise, and he brought it back to the people who thought they had gotten away clean. The story of Zechariah Creed is over, but the question his mother's name poses, that question is still waiting for its answer. God remembers. Do we? If this story moved you, please subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment letting us know what city and country you're joining us from. These stories only survive because you choose to remember them. Thank you for being here.